Sure. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I know it's not a big turnout. Um, Trying to do these planning meetings on Zoom is very difficult. And I think I mentioned this the last time for those that have attended planning meetings before. We could be a very boisterous and vocal group, and we like to get up and walk and put dots on things and lean over maps and draw on them. And doing that via Zoom is very, very, very difficult. And so, you know, in the future, I hope we get back to more in-person meetings. We'll be looking in 2022 how to do more hybrids to make that work. But for now, this is what you got. So for those that don't know me, my name is Lisa Scott. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Aberdeen. And if we want to just go around and list everybody that's here, if we want to start first with, I think, we'll start with City Council, the members that are in attendance, and I know the mayor will be joining us. He is just going to be late. He had another meeting that came up today as an emergency. So I have Katie Catchman, who is on the City Council, and she is also on our Finance Committee. A council member, Liz Ellis, who is obviously on City Council, and she's on the Public Works Committee. Did I get that right? And Joshua Francie, who is obviously also on City Council, but he too is on the Public Works Committee. So I really want to thank you guys for coming tonight. Monica Kunau, who is on my Planning Commission. So thank you, Monica, for being here tonight. And then outside of your team, we have Joy Stapleton and Deb Lecca, who are citizens and very active and involved in the community. So that is who we have on our end, and I will leave that up to you, Rachel, for you and your team.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I am Rachel Miller, and I'm an urban planner and urban designer for Makers Architecture and Urban Design. And the City of Aberdeen hired us to help you all with your comprehensive plan. And I'll talk more about that, but after our introductions. I'll let Ian go next.
Good evening. My name is Ian Crozier. I am also a planner with Makers Architecture and Urban Design. It's been a lot of fun working on this comprehensive plan and even getting to go in person to Aberdeen recently. So looking forward to the discussion tonight. Sam?
Hey everybody, I'm Sam Burkham, an associate with Leland Consulting Group. We're based out of Portland. We've been sort of active in Grays Harbor for a number of years on a couple of projects, including this one. We largely do economic development, land use economics, that sort of thing. Nick?
Thanks, Sam. I'm Nick Bratton, Senior Director of Policy with Forterra. We're a regional conservation and community building group based out of Seattle, but we've done a couple things in Aberdeen in the past, some community visioning work, and had a hand in the Timberworks project a few years back as well. And we do a lot of conservation work in the Chehalis Basin. So I'm glad to be part of the land use and policy conversation here. And who else do we have? Is that it from our team, Rachel?
That's it. I did see that Dan Lindgren joined, and then there's somebody joining in right now as well. Lisa, you want to unmute for a sec? I think you were talking.
Yeah, Dan is also a member of the Planning Commission. And somebody else is trying to connect too, I see.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you all so much for having us here again. I want to say sincerely that it has been a real pleasure working with Lisa in particular, and then all of you all on Council and Planning Commission and folks that have come up to all the meetings that we've had along the way. So it's really been a pleasure working with you all and putting this comprehensive plan together. So thanks for letting us work with you. And we're nearing the end, and we hope that we're getting it right. And that's what this meeting is all about, is checking in and making sure that we're getting the most important things into your plan for Aberdeen. Okay, I just started sharing the screen. So hopefully folks are seeing that. Okay. So tonight, as I mentioned, we're giving an update on what the changes we've made since we last met with Planning Commission and earlier meetings with focus groups and community members earlier in the process, and confirming direction on a few key issues. So every meeting we get a couple more questions like, oh, should we do this? Or should we add this policy? Or is that land use designation really in the right place? So we're going to talk about those hanging questions since the last draft. And then Lisa at the end will let you all know how you can stay involved and work on seeing this plan to fruition, which is the whole point of it, right? Okay, we do have about a 2-hour meeting and we have a lot to discuss. So I'm going to try to keep things moving, especially during our discussion points. So I would like to be mindful and not interrupt anybody, but if I do interrupt you, here's my apologies in advance. It's just because we do still have a few questions and we're trying to get to all of them. So we will talk for a long time, starting around 6:15 or so, about these bigger issues after giving you an introduction. And then we'll have just an open conversation to make sure we really got it all right. And then talk about next steps and closing it. I did want to mention that we have been working with you all for over a year now, and you can see the list. I'm not going to go through it, but the different meetings we've had, the ways that we've talked with you, and the different drafts that we've done more recently. We are really at the very end of the process, and you'll see we're hoping that everything wraps up by December or early January. So where we are today, we're headed towards a comprehensive plan. Hopefully you all have seen a draft, and if you haven't, there is one up online. What a comprehensive plan is something that cities use to help make decisions in the long run over what to do. So in their day-to-day decision making, this is their guiding framework. So it's a blueprint for the future. They usually look about 20 years out. They guide topics like land use. So what kinds of buildings and activities are allowed where, transportation, housing, development in general, and the environment, and public services. When you're in a community that's planning under more specific state laws about planning and growth management, you do have to set level of service standards. We didn't have to do that here, but it's a good way to think about things, that the city is providing services and there's a certain quality that could be made or used to meet community members' needs. And zoning and development regulations are not in the comprehensive plan itself, but the policies here guide what those implementing regulations are, and they should be consistent. So I wanted to give a little bit of a review, especially because we do have a couple of community members who I don't think have been at some of the earlier meetings. But what we've heard loud and clear is that Aberdeen is within this incredible region. Some of the strongest assets or things that people treasured the most about Aberdeen were all the things around: the beaches, the forest, the waterfront, all the beautiful places nearby and around. Alongside that, of course, the small town community and the easier, comfortable way of life. So there are some major physical assets. I'm just going to name a few here. One is the downtown, another is the waterfront, and then another is just the path on the tourist network. There are a few constraints and challenges. A lot of them are physical in nature. The purple lines represent steep topography, so that makes it a little hard to get around. Some of the orange lines means that there's fast traffic, so that can make it feel less safe for people walking, biking, or rolling around. And then there are a bunch of colors on the map, and they can mean flooding or tsunami hazards, tsunami inundation hazards. So there are some physical flooding or physical challenges like that. Some of the colors mean more like wetlands and environmental assets as well, but they could be constraints to development. So earlier in the process, we worked with a handful of you all on some guiding principles for the plan. So I'm just going to quickly go over them. One, Aberdeen is unique and your identity is important to you all, and making sure that everything in the plan supports that idea that Aberdeen is a unique place, and the sense of place here is different from anywhere else. and you all are connected to this place in a unique way. Economic prosperity, so everyone's looking for good jobs and wages that support your way of life. Human health, so the community's healthy, people can get around easily and eat healthy food. Environmental health, so not only are people healthy, but the land around you and the organisms and everything around. And equity, so the idea that everybody living in Aberdeen, regardless of your background, can have a good chance at life success. And resilience, so with to whatever storms come along, physical, economic, whatever, Aberdeen can rise back up. Okay, I am going to hand it over to Sam to give a little bit of a little more background on the purpose behind comp plans.
Thanks, Rachel. So typically, what we see in a comprehensive plan is really it's a fundamental policy guide for pretty much everything that funnels from the city. And as Rachel said, that can be anything from transportation, housing, land use, economic development, utilities, environmental, you name it. And so, typically we lay out goals as we have done. There will be policies under each one of those goals. And then each one of those policies feeds into a specific action item or action items that follow on from the comprehensive plan. So how we think about it from an economic development and economic growth standpoint is that pretty much everything in the comprehensive plan is important to implementation. It's not an implementation guide, but everything that comes through it can be rooted in follow-on uses, right? So it's useful in telling private and public stakeholders like developers and businesses what the community and the city wants. But just as importantly, it's criteria and a guide for saying what the city and the community does not want. And the comprehensive plan is the basis in basically to do that. So, if you go on to the next slide, Rachel, obviously there's pretty much everything here that you can think about. It's all encompassing, and it relates to development and investment and employment and businesses, thinking back to implementation, developers, private partners, anyone that might be interested in investing in a community. They like to see a community that has an established vision. So it's as much a marketing piece as anything else. And so it tells those partners, that the city has thought about land accommodations, it's thought about housing options, it's thought about transportation and infrastructure, the environment, opportunities for economic activities, and workforce development, and everything in between, and more. So it really is the sort of baseline document for which the city can launch almost all of its efforts in creating that healthy, prosperous city, as we've laid out there. You're muted, Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, this is almost like a little homework exercise. I want everyone, if you are comfortable, to close your eyes and imagine Aberdeen and picture maybe some of those assets that I just mentioned or some of those challenges, and try to think of your top 3 or so priorities for the comprehensive plan. What really needs to be in this plan? What is part of the vision for Aberdeen? And we'll just do a couple minutes here. If it's helpful for you, you can open your eyes and you can jot down your ideas. Okay, just a couple more seconds on it. All right. So we'll come back to that later in the meeting, but keep that list handy. And as we go through, see if we touch on it. And if we don't, then in our big wrap up at the end, bring it up and we'll see if we can, if we've addressed it in the plan and we just didn't cover it tonight, or we can see how we can strengthen those ideas in the plan. Okay. So these are some of the key issues we'll be talking about tonight. We have a centers and corridors way of thinking about Aberdeen, green corridors related to that. A managed retreat policy is something new that we have just recently started talking about in some of our more recent meetings and adding in, although there was some resiliency language that was talking around it earlier. I'm speaking about it more explicitly now. A hazardous materials storage policy, and transportation downtown, tax increment financing or TIF, connecting downtown and the waterfront, and the land use designation map and definitions. And there's a lot of different land uses that we might talk about there. Okay, on the centers and corridors strategy, we have worked with the Planning Commission and focus groups early in the process to identify a handful of centers. And this doesn't mean that there aren't other places in Aberdeen that are important. This just means that these are identified for some activity that's already going on there, like downtown and the port, which are already big major hubs, and East Aberdeen, where the shopping center is. Those are big major hubs with a lot of activities already happening and important things going on. And then there are other hubs identified because of an anchor, like an existing business there, or a park that's really a lovely civic use, or something that connects it to the neighborhood around. So it doesn't mean that there aren't neighborhoods around there that are also important, but these are just some ways to focus energy investment on places that can have a little more mixed use character going forward. And if Lisa's comfortable, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how it relates to Aberdeen's history. And you're on mute.
Okay, so what I found to be very interesting is the Planning Commission, several years ago, went on to do a draft land use map, and we were all about clean lines and making sure, you know, we kept it fairly simple in the land use. You had a residential, you had a commercial, you had an industrial, you had a waterfront, and it's those clean, simple lines to get away from scattered. And what I've seen shift between then and today are we're gearing ourselves back toward what we used to have, which are those neighborhood centers. We're starting to see people want to bring the neighborhood grocery store back, or the market, maybe a neighborhood coffee shop, someplace where you can gather as a neighborhood and just meet each other, enjoy each other. We're just starting to see that come back again. And I think that's what this draft really reflects, was capturing what the community had mentioned and the direction heading back. So it seems interesting that we're all back to a cycle. And I know, Liz Ellis, you had sent a comment about, well, what happened to the Bench Drive area? And it isn't the redheaded stepchild, most definitely. Some of these neighborhood centers that we've had drawn out have pretty specific commercial areas already in them. And when you look at the Bench Drive area, it doesn't have that kind of neighborhood commercial vibe to it outside of the church. So it definitely, it's something we can look at and we can talk about. But that was not done intentionally to leave it off. It's just when we were looking at these neighborhood centers, it was already historically where commercial kind of existed. So did I capture that, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing I'll mention is just the idea of this 15-minute neighborhood. where people can get to a place where they can meet up with their neighbor or get to a corner store or a grocery store or a cafe or something within about a 15-minute walk or a quicker bicycle ride. And that has to do a lot with what happened during COVID, where we were all stuck in our homes and weren't really meeting up in our workplaces as much anymore, or some of us. And also resiliency and climate action and just being more environmentally friendly and using our cars less. I will also mention, I believe Ian is going to talk a little bit more about neighborhood centers, the land use designations that are associated with them later. So we can circle back to this conversation then. We've heard now about Bench Drive and then also the Bay City Boulevard area up the hill, that could also be a potential neighborhood center. So I think when we get to the land use designations, let's keep that in the back of your mind, but let's talk about if those are places that should be neighborhood center areas once you hear about what the land use designation is. In general, though, does this look like it's going the right direction and reflecting what we've talked about? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. If anybody wants to come off mute and add a comment, please feel free. Okay, we're going to keep going. We have a lot of topics. If my arrow will work. Okay, so I do want to mention that in the last Planning Commission meeting, we did get good direction on adding some green corridors to this map. So the map that the green that you see on the map, that's just the duller green, is mostly critical areas. So they're wetlands or erosion or steep slopes, or stream corridors and buffers. So the bright green that you see on there are some highlights that Planning Commission gave us that are really important for the Green Corridors Network. So we will add that into the next draft and get that in there. Any comments on those? That's more of an update. Okay. Okay, and then I mentioned earlier that we have added an explicit managed retreat policy. So I know that Lisa has been talking about this with the Planning Commission for a while. And it's still in fledgling stages, and these are long-term things, and they're done at a regional scale. You work with Grays Harbor and work on your hazard mitigation plans and all of your things. And they're hard, difficult topics to think about what happens when a disaster like a tsunami comes. But you now, if you go with this in your comprehensive plan, you now have a policy that says that you're doing this or that you should be doing this. And the idea of managed retreat is that you're thinking about what disasters are there and what the risks are, what the social vulnerabilities are, and figuring out safe, equitable ways to move people away from risks in this case. And if anybody would like to add to that, I know there's a lot of expertise in the room. I know Nick has experience doing this in other communities. If anyone wants to add or comment, then please go right ahead. Okay. And Nick, I'm going to hand this one over to you to talk more about this.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Sorry, Rachel. It's been a long day. So hazardous materials were a topic that came up a little bit later in the progression of our conversation around policy issues. And so one land use policy that we have drafted some language to amend is, as you see here on the screen, is to continue to prohibit bulk crude oil storage and handling facilities within the city limits. And then the additional language that we've proposed gets added to that is explore broadening the prohibition to include additional fossil fuels. So this is, as policy language goes, this is a fairly light touch. This is not committing the city to do anything. It's not directive. It's just saying simply explore, further materials to include in the existing prohibition. Now, we flagged this as an area of interest that we'd like to get some further discussion around. For one reason, because this is an opportunity for the community to, set a kind of an Aberdeen-centric policy on what is proving to be somewhat controversial topic. The subject of hazardous materials coming either by rail, by sea, by land through the city into the port and industrial areas can have adverse effects if something problematic happens. And so this policy, we tried to draft it in a way to be consistent with policies in other areas of the comprehensive plan that prioritize human health outcomes, environmental and climate resilience, being prepared for disasters, and the equity theme of trying to avoid disproportionate burdens on some parts of the community. So we've heard some feedback kind of on different sides of this issue. Some commenters have wanted to retain more flexibility for how the city sets regulation and treats hazardous material transportation and storage. And other people really want to see a more narrow and tighter set of language around this to increase restrictions. And then finally, one other piece of commentary we've received is a suggestion that future decisions on the transportation and storage of hazardous material be deferred to future political bodies. And just from my professional perspective, I see that as being challenging because that isn't really creating policy. That's just deferring a decision to a set of individuals whose opinions and positions and criteria for those decisions may be different from what our values are now. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the future by deferring those decisions to future elected officials. And it doesn't really create policy vision or direction around how the city wants to treat this decision. So I was hoping to hear some feedback from this group this evening. What do you think feels appropriate for the city of Aberdeen to be laying out as a policy vision for how to handle the storage and transportation of hazardous materials within the city?
I agree with you. Thank you for that. I don't think that having different representatives come in and everything changing every time we have an election is a smart way to go after something as big as this at all. So I appreciate that's not there. And I don't understand where I see natural gas may be needed. Yeah, that's true. But a gas station and a tanker truck could be bulk storage. Couldn't you, rather than deleting that, couldn't you just set a standard for the size and the amount that determines what bulk storage is?
Great point. I feel like that level of detail might be more appropriate in the regulatory scale, maybe a little bit specific for the comprehensive plan. But I like the direction you're going. This is the kind of thinking and feedback that we really want to hear tonight. So I'm hearing that you're supporting the idea of having policy language in the comp plan that gives direction on this topic. Is that a fair?
Absolutely.
Comments? Okay. I saw some other hands. Liz, I think you had something to share here.
Thank you, Nick. I see this, and there are many other pieces in the comp plan that would be really wonderful to kind of batch together as maybe a sub-plan that addresses carbon reduction, climate change, carbon reduction. And I'm happy to see these because these are all issues that will affect many parts of how the city conducts business and and our economy, for sure.
Great. So I'm hearing interest from Liz there on pursuing kind of a subset of policies, maybe a climate action plan, community resilience plan, something like that, which specifically addresses sustainability and climate and disaster type questions. Is that a good reading, Liz?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Great suggestion. Thank you. Martin, I see you have a hand raised. And you're on mute.
Yes,
There we
yes.
go.
Hi there. I had to reject a phone call there. Sorry about that.
No
I'm
worries.
glad I tuned in tonight, and I cannot believe I'm going to be the person to say this, but I claim to represent the blue collar folks of Aberdeen, and I think that there's probably a little backstory on why very recently people don't like oil trains coming through the town, and that's because they tried to ship oil, and the oil tanker cars, which were empty, were sabotaged 3 different times. And there became a huge concern that there were going to be oil spills. Now, I think it is very pertinent to point out that this is a blue collar industrial town and always has been. And at one point was bigger than Seattle. But I think it's important to know where the roots are, because there is a huge class of working people in this town that depend on longshoreman jobs and truck driving jobs and train engineer jobs. And we have the closest deep water port to Asia, 1 day shorter by cargo ship, in fact, to Japan and Beijing, and or whatever their shipping town is. And honestly, we've not been utilizing our deep water port. Now we do ship cars. We don't do cargo containers anymore, but oil for a little while there was pretty lucrative. We do have a biofuel plant, right over in Hokum, I think. And anyway, I'm kind of going on a diatribe, but I think that we're trying to insert perhaps some politics, and even there was a suggestion of forbidding future political bodies to make a decision on this, which is kind of blocking somebody from taking a more progressive route when new facts come in. I think that's kind of not fair. But anyway, I think it's just important to note that there are a lot of people in this town that would love to see industry be brought up a little bit more and be a little more prevalent. And we have a lot of socially and environmentally and climate concerned citizens, and not to devalue that, those are legitimate concerns, but we are in a logging town, and it says, lumber capital of the world on the welcome sign. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, but I think this is maybe not in the best interest of the Planning Commission and the Comprehensive Plan Group to recommend. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for that feedback. I'm hearing, just to kind of reiterate what I've heard at very high level, a need to balance economic development, the existing job base, industry, port, with environmental priorities. And granted, there are a whole multifaceted array of interests that we're trying to express through the comprehensive plan. Just wanted to clarify the future council comment. This policy doesn't restrain or constrict any future decision making. It's just saying that there should be a policy that gives the city some direction now, so that the city wouldn't be deferring case by case decisions in the future. So by no means does this tie anybody's hands for the future. It's just saying.
I appreciate the clarification.
So,
I just
yeah.
didn't like the ruling of absolutism. I appreciate that.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your input, Martin. That's really valuable. Let's go to Joy, and then Joshua, and then back to Deb after that on hands raised. So Joy, over to you.
Joy, you're on mute.
Okay, I got it. Got to get used to this. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I guess. Okay. All right. I have a really big concern about the use of the pesticides with Monsanto. I'll give you an example. Over by Safeway, there's a strip of grass. I used to walk my dog there, and the guy that was spraying the material, whatever they were using, he told me to keep my dog out of that territory. And she did get extremely sick, throwing up 3 times one night after being in a local park. It's highly dangerous to children and animals. And I don't know, I'm not sure which city it is, but I believe there's a city in Grays Harbor that's already banned that, is it glyphosate or something? I can't remember the name of it, but it was the Monsanto really toxic chemical. And I'm finding that a lot of people still using this stuff, and it gets into the waterways, it gets into the sewers, and it gets all over the place. So I would consider that a big concern. That's about all I have to say on that topic.
Okay, great, thank you. So that's a great kind of personal anecdote of kind of immediate daily impacts on our routine in the city from hazardous materials. So Deb, I think you have another comment to share now.
Yeah, I appreciate what Martin had to bring up, but I just would like to say that, you know, just because we're taking a route where we lay down a policy doesn't mean a policy can't be changed. You just want to make sure that the people that are changing it are people that are educated and have the background to make very wise decisions, not just based on politics. And I think that's very, very important. And I'm also looking at, you know, talking about we're a logging town. Well, we're not a logging town. We used to be a logging town. And that, you know, all of that, we need to be looking toward the future, not going toward the past. And so, yes, we do need to have some blue collar jobs, but blue collar jobs are leaving. They're leaving everywhere. And so to be at the front of it where we want to be, I just don't see catering and going back to that. Yes, seeing that some things that need to be still here, I think using our port is a good example of that, but we're not going to go back and be a logging town. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deb. Rachel, how are we doing on time? Are we good to?
We're okay because we got through some of the earlier discussion questions pretty quickly.
Okay, good. Then rather than hurry us along, I just want to check if there are any other comments. Joshua, I see you still have the hand raised. Is that from before?
Yeah.
You have something else you wanted to throw in?
Yeah, I just want to briefly say, first, I was a little concerned when you guys brought this up, but I like the direction that it's taken. Thanks.
Terrific. Last call on any comments on the hazardous material policy language. I think we've heard some varied and helpful ideas. So seeing no other hands, Rachel, I'll pass it back to you for the next topic. Thank you, everyone, for your input.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Okay, actually, we're moving on to Sam now with some more economic development related strategies.
Thanks, Rachel. So this may be a topic that's familiar to some people and new to others. I'll approach it twofold. Well, first I'll address the high level transportation. I'm not a transportation consultant by any means, but basically what we're talking about here is, we've got 101 in what we call a couplet, meaning two one-way streets running down Wishka and on Heron Street, and we are open to the idea of considering changes to that traffic pattern, right? And switching that up, thinking about alternative routes such as Market Street for that highway traffic. What we think about in terms of economic development is once you divert or change a classification or road classification from state to local, you all of a sudden open up opportunities for the city to do a lot more with that street. So what that might look like if, for example, Market Street or another route became the 101 route, is being able to potentially revert back to two-way traffic on those streets, on Wishka and Heron, which is shown in many countless examples to be beneficial to businesses, to walkability, to pedestrian and bike traffic, helps slow traffic generally, and just to create a more authentic, pedestrian-oriented downtown environment. So we are by no means proposing that this happens in creating a policy that is framed around the idea of exploring other options. All we are doing is simply saying, keep that option open. We know that there's been conversations and efforts in the past that have looked at different configurations of the downtown transportation network. But at the end of the day, I think that it is important to keep that option open to the city. And from a economic development perspective, the downtown focus is such it's a regional, cultural, economic hub, and any effort that can be made to improve that environment, to support business activity, to support tourism, should probably be considered. At least that's my 2 cents. So, this is a recent insert into the latest edition of the comp plan draft, and so we're open to ideas to think about how to frame that, and we'd love to hear some thoughts.
I see
Yeah,
Liz.
this is Liz. How well do two-way streets work with roundabouts?
Many roundabouts are used on two-way streets. I would hesitate to say that there are great locations for roundabouts downtown, though, just because the right-of-ways don't look that big to me. Roundabouts need a lot of space, so we'd have to look a lot closer.
We are getting one at Market and F Street, and where Fuller Way meets Market.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also the discussion of having one over by Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just curious functionally if it would create a whole nother set of traffic flow problems.
They are compatible, two-way streets and roundabouts.
And one of my constituents who's been involved in the planning process way longer than I did mention that this had been discussed before, and her concern was that it would turn a relatively quiet street, being West Market, into a highway equivalent. And but maybe if everything remains two-way, that wouldn't be a problem.
One thing about two-way traffic is that it does make a street feel less like a highway, and cars tend to naturally slow down. They know that there's traffic coming at them. It's like an intuitive gut thing you do when you have something close to you, and especially if something's tall. So like street trees, if they're nice and close to you, or if you have oncoming traffic, you drive a lot slower.
And then the other thing I think we should acknowledge that this would be a real change to Market Street if that was the route. But planning is always about trade-offs, and you've got really a couple of pretty remarkable downtown streets down on Heron and Wishkah right now, and they're highways. And Market, not that I'm super familiar with, it does seem like it's not the center of town in the way those other two streets are. So looking at trade-offs is if we're going to have a highway downtown, where should it go?
Thanks for that, Ian.
If the library and City Hall connote a downtown center, then it would certainly impact those two buildings.
But Liz, isn't City Hall moving? And with the library, you do have an ability to get in there from another direction. So, and I don't know, it just seems to me like you would have more of a downtown that looked like a Seabrook kind of thing, where people feel like you have a retreat, a place to stop, a place to grab something to eat and do some shopping, more of a Centralia feel. I don't know.
City Hall's not moving that I know of.
Okay. There's a rumor. There's a lot of rumors.
The mayor's on here. Maybe he can chime in on that one, but that would be news to me. But again, it could.
Okay, any more thoughts on what you'd like to see out of transportation downtown? And Deb, I see you're moving, but on mute.
Have you been working with the Main Street group? They have a lot of ideas and a lot of other resources that work with them to generate plans and things. Is that something that's been happening?
Will has been involved in the early onset of the group meetings that we've had. So yes.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, Liz, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Rachel. I just wanted to ask, will we be talking about transportation again as we go through the plan? This isn't our last opportunity to visit transportation, or did I bring up all of my transportation things?
We have one slide about accessing the waterfront, but we have no other explicit transportation slides tonight, though you are welcome to talk about it now or at the open discussion at the end, either time.
I'll wait for the open discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like we are ready to move on. Okay, Sam.
So the really dry, exciting slide is mine for the night. People may not be too familiar with tax increment financing, but it is essentially it's a funding tool for public agencies to utilize for infrastructure. And historically, Washington has been pretty opposed to the use of tax increment financing in the past for many different reasons. It's been hung up in courts and whatnot and been challenged. But lately, just as recently as June or July of this year, the legislature put forth a bill that reauthorized tax increment financing to be used under many different, there's a lot of restrictions to it, but it is an available tool that is a fantastic tool for cities to use for infrastructure and capital and permanent improvements. So a couple of uses that we could think about with tax increment financing for Aberdeen is mainly site specific, less so for district wide like revitalization efforts, but it can be site specific. It can be used for infrastructure, so transportation improvements or utilities or site cleanup. It could also be used for parking, like a parking structure, but you'd need to have a private development partner to really make the case that the tax revenue generation wouldn't happen without that public investment from the city or the port or some other public agency. So we've drafted a policy here just to start. I mean, the details of this new legislative bill is still being clarified, by the experts, and we're considered one of the experts, and we're still trying to work out what it means in its entirety. But it is an important and valuable and powerful tool if used right. So basically, this policy is just getting at, evaluating the potential uses of that that tax increment financing, or TIF, to fund specifically things like infrastructure and other capital projects. And what we would typically look at doing is a feasibility study. You can only have up to 2 different TIF districts in the city as part of these new restrictions. But places that we would think about maybe utilizing this is places like the mall site, or a couple of big waterfront areas like on the South Shore that haven't necessarily developed but are vacant or underutilized, and maybe need a little bit more public investment to redevelop for the benefit of the community. So I'll pause there. Happy to clarify anything. I know that's start talking about tax generation, because you lose a few people. But happy to field any questions or concerns or ideas.
Okay. Not seeing any concerns at the moment, so we'll get that policy into the plan.
Can I just quickly say that,
Yeah.
we just turned down a very important thing where we were going to combine Aberdeen and Hoquiam's fire department, because the people everything that I heard, the reason that people voted against that is because they felt they could not afford any more taxes. I don't think you're going to get a lot of support in that.
So the one thing I will mention with tax increment financing, it is not an additional tax.
Okay.
It is leveraging the tax growth of new construction and just general tax increases year on year because of inflation or property value increases or improvements, and it's leveraging that increase to fund the project. So it's not a tax increase. And that's
good to know.
That's something that's, I think that's something that's misunderstood about tax increment financing, nationwide. Many people think that the proportion of taxes that is distributed to each taxing jurisdiction, so the fire district, the city, the county, the school district, whoever it might be, those remain equal under this legislation, and it's really only the increases in the new construction that are able to be leveraged. So in some ways it's less impactful than other states, but it is impactful nonetheless.
And have a thought that might put it as less attractive for for new construction to be done here?
I don't think so, because the city can, you can do a feasibility study and forecast whatever tax generation there might be, and it could be like a developer reimbursement where developer partners with the city, but the city needs to build a bunch of infrastructure. Developer builds that infrastructure. Once the tax is generated, city reimburses developer with that increase in TIF. So it's one of those things that actually it's proved to be in other states, including here in Oregon, one of the best tools to attracting new investment. And I think if done right, the same can be done for Aberdeen. And so, it does remain to be seen whether in Washington how much these sort of other additional restrictions play a part. But I still think that given that it's a statewide thing, it's not like where am I going with this? I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, Deb. But given that it's a statewide thing, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of people seeing it as a negative. It would be hard to see this as negative, along with every other sort of initiative that could be offered.
I think Dan has his hand up too.
Yeah, I have a question, Sam, on tax increment financing. I know about where all the money goes because I'm the county assessor for Grace Harbor County. So I know how the taxing part of it works and where the new construction dollars go. That's the only way that cities are able to raise their budgets each year in Washington State outside of the 1% increase that they get each year. So I wanted to clarify tax increment financing. I know it's not law yet, but it's very possible that it's going to pass. So it's a reimbursement over time after they develop. Is that what you're saying? Using,
No, I mean,
new construction dollars?
I think it can be, right. It's the TIF district is set up, and I think it is down to the jurisdiction to decide how those TIF dollars are distributed. And I think the main
additional tax, property tax dollars generated from the construction of these projects, right?
Yeah, because it's beyond, I think it still trying to work it out, sorry, but there are some funky things in that it does exclude, it doesn't comply, or it's kind of, it's outside of the 1% tax cap, but it does then capture new construction. So it's hard to say one way or another, but I think, what is clear is it will be up to the jurisdiction to decide on how that program is implemented. I think TIF will be generated in a similar way to how it's generated anywhere else, but I think the implementation of it will be down to the jurisdiction. So the city can decide whether to fund something up front if there's TIF already generated, or it can be reimbursed down the line. It's just yeah, and I know Nick's got his hand up there, so he may know something about it too.
Yeah, I mean, because it's money in, money out. The 101 is protected, and that goes to all the districts. The only other additional money that they get is new construction dollars, and if they've decided to forego those new construction dollars and give them back, then I can understand you saying it's no added tax dollars and that making sense. But if it's not that, then it is added tax dollars. I can guarantee it. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But then again, it is a small area as well.
Yeah,
I think what is different about this is that it is not necessarily like the big district wide kind of entirety of downtown that you might see in sort of other states. It will be vacant lots, smaller areas, maybe 20 acres or something. Yeah,
for a certain project or something.
It's projects, specific projects, public-private partnerships.
Gotcha.
And Nick.
Yeah, Fortera's been drafting our own TIF-related bill, so I've been peripherally following the parallel progression of the current TIF legislation. Not 100% sure. I do know the TIF bill did pass last year in Olympia, so it's in place and available for cities to use. It does create an exemption to the 1% year-over-year property tax lid. So cities can tax at a higher rate using their district purely for calculation purposes. So in addition to new construction, you can actually increase your tax rate and generate more revenue that way. And then my understanding is the two mechanisms for using it are either sort of collect money as it comes in, and so you're just sort of gathering the revenue over time, and once you have enough to spend, then you can make that investment in your sewer or bridge or transit system or whatever you're investing in. Alternatively, you can bond up front for the expected revenue that the program would generate. So you get it in, it's inflation adjusted, so you get maybe a little bit smaller amount up front, but the advantage is you then have the money now to make the investment that will support the growth or the redevelopment that is to come, rather than making the investment after the project happens. So trade-offs to each approach, but I do believe the program is in place and usable now, and it does have an exemption to the 1% tax rate.
Which means it would be more tax dollars to fund it. So her question before Sam started talking was, is this going to cost more taxpayer revenue? And Sam said it wouldn't, but it definitely would if they're raising the cap from 101 to 103 or whatever they raise it to. It would be added tax dollars.
That's at the discretion of the local jurisdiction. So
Or they can spend the money out of pocket, I suppose, as a city out of their existing budget.
Yeah. And then the revenue that you can raise is also limited, I believe, by the bill. And so the tax increase is just calculated within the district, but the revenue is actually spread across the entire jurisdiction. So, let's say a $10 million revenue increase through higher taxes might result in a couple cents per property spread across the entire jurisdiction. So it could result in higher taxes, but that requires a decision by the local government to exercise that option.
If they don't want to affect their existing budget, it would mean more tax dollars. So that clarification should be there, when you're talking about tax increment financing, because tax increment financing means you either collect more tax dollars to fund it, or you take money away from the existing city budget or that jurisdiction's budget to fund it, whether it be over time or they do a bond and they pay it back, it's tax dollars. So it's not extra money that just comes out of nowhere. That I just have to clarify that. It's my wheelhouse, and I try to clarify if there's ever any misclarifications on property tax related issues. So.
Correct.
Thanks, Dan. And actually, thanks, Nick, also, because I've just learned something as well. So as I said, it's a brand new program, but I think at the end of the day, traditional TIF districts will be, it's a great clarification, Dan, that you are taking something away, and you are taking, typically in TIF districts, you are taking revenue away from the other taxing jurisdictions, as you mentioned. But the general consensus when you set up when you set up a TIF district is that upon the sunset or termination of whenever that district happens, the overall tax revenue will be greater than if that TIF district did not exist and those public investments were not made, right? So, there is a trade-off. You basically say the taxing jurisdictions, fire district, whatever it might be, they're going to take a lower amount of money in tax generation. In return, they're going to get far more down the line, whenever that may be, 10, 15 years or whatever. So yeah, just a quick add on there.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah.
Just a really quick thing. Is it definitely have to be for cities, or would that be possibly spread over the county?
I think Nick may be able to chime in here, but it's any public agency, and actually ports as well are eligible.
My understanding was it was just for cities, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
So I'm hearing, generally I heard support. There was some concern that if it's more or additional taxes, that could be concerning. But I did also hear at the end that if it's used for economic development purposes, and in the end the city is wealthier by using it, then that concern is not as concerning. Am I hearing all that correctly?
No, not really. No, because
okay.
Because we obviously know that to combine our fire departments would have been a very big step for both cities, and it would have been a good thing. People said they could not afford it. So if there's going to be more taxes at this time, the way the economy is running, the way our job systems are going,
okay.
I think that you're going to get support from this area.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. On to the next one. We have heard a lot along the way about reconnecting to the waterfront, and there were already policies about this in the plan, but we did add an image here. And Sam, I don't know if you wanted to add any more on this slide about economic benefits to downtown about this or anything.
Yeah, I know that we just have, there's been efforts made in the past about connecting to the waterfront, and obviously from an economic development standpoint, it is such a critical asset. And there are few opportunities in the city, you know, apart from this one, to actually access the waterfront. And so there are so many economic benefits to making this connection, especially it being so close to downtown, from a tourism, employment, and residential element as well. You know, we know that the waterfront access or waterfront amenities can really drive price premiums in residential units, for example. So you start creating an environment that development that wasn't necessarily feasible to build in the past starts becoming more feasible. And that's a higher level discussion that speaks to just amenities and the sort of downtown environment at large as well, and just maybe improving that environment. You know, I think just creating that more attractive waterfront access and space has many economic benefits that go beyond just driving up prices and rents.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
This is mostly just an update that we are adding the illustration from a previous planning project in Aberdeen, and really highlighting this because we thought that it was getting lost amongst all the other policies, and it keeps coming up again and again and again that you all want to connect your downtown to the waterfront. Okay, I'm going to move on from there.
Rachel,
Oh yeah,
excuse me.
Go ahead,
This is Liz. The squiggly line that's right inland off of the shore. I just wanted to identify, is that intended to be the levee or a waterfront trail?
that looks like it's an arrow. I don't know. We cut off the rest of the image, but it looks like it's pedestrian access, a trail, just
So-
by the arrow I see there.
It's, yeah, I think the location of the levee varies a bit.
Mhm.
And it would be helpful to maybe put that in as an overlay or something, like with white dotted lines or something that shows, so there, it's very clear which areas will be outside of the levee versus
Yeah.
inside of the levee.
Yeah, the levee is farther north.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that this area, if it's an open space, it can be floodable, and it can actually, you know, retain a lot of water in a flood event.
I don't know that we're 100% sure yet where it's going to traverse the property the city owns on the waterfront yet for 100%
Okay.
surety, but we can definitely get something on there.
Okay. All right. Okay, so there are a handful of additional edits. Some of these are late breaking, just coming in this week. So these are proposals that we'd like to put forward to you all today and see what flies, what sticks, how can we strengthen our approach in a couple of areas. So one thing we have heard from the beginning that our focus should be on housing and economic development and connecting land use and transportation better. So we think we've hit a lot of those marks well. We are not positive that we have addressed how to support our Aberdeen people who are experiencing homelessness best in the comprehensive plan. So some things that we're suggesting is to add a sidebar in the housing element that highlights what parts of the plan are supporting or could benefit this situation. So there are some policies that do relate. So like the housing supply, diversity, and affordability, there's a lot of that in the housing element. We want to, you know, clarify that that directly relates to homelessness issues. The economic development that's so strong here as well, The idea there obviously is the root causes behind homeless, or one of the root causes behind homelessness is just job availability and good paying jobs. And then also for people who are experiencing homelessness and for people maybe who have less means to drive around, that it is easy to get around and get to your job. So being able to get by foot or bike or however. So those are some of the things that we want to strengthen, that they're in the plan and their relationship to homelessness. So these are some of the typical things that a comprehensive plan does affect or provide policy guidance on. But then there are a couple of others that we could add to more directly provide policy support for addressing homelessness in Aberdeen. So a couple ideas are listed below. So one of them is that comprehensive plans and cities do have essential public services. And one thing that cities are not allowed to do is to prevent essential public services from being cited in their cities. So one thing is to think of homelessness or services or homes or shelters that are being used for people experiencing homelessness to be considered like essential public facilities, that they could be not prevented from being located anywhere in Aberdeen. And then another is just that there are a lot of people and organizations and regional work that has to be done to address issues and across the spectrum, across the continuum of care. So facilitating the conversations and the work amongst all the partners. So that's another policy that we could add. And then another is that cities can accidentally do things that make it hard to cite shelters or transitional homes or types of living spaces or just different things. And we don't even know that they're in the code sometimes. And until somebody really looks with a fine-tooth comb, you might not even know what barriers might be in your code. So those are some ideas, and just throwing them out there and seeing what might stick and what has support or what's of interest to you all. I see, Liz, you already have your hand up. You want to add to this one? Oh, and you're actually on mute.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm so pleased to see this as an addition. There were so many areas of the previous draft, or the draft that we're talking about, where it refers to housing and affordability without specifically referencing that there are people without housing who need housing or some sort of shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very happy to see this. The plan uses words. I lost count of how many times the word adequate is used. And I would like to see every adequate replaced with something much more concrete, and basically reframe some of those sentences from something general to here's a specific goal, that just reframes those. And I have pages and pages of edits that I need to just compile and send to you, but off the cuff, that's my first reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I saw Joshua come off mute. Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, I like these additional sidebar items and all the policies, honestly.
Thank you. That was a nice, clear, straightforward comment.
Rachel, too, I mean, to go back to what Liz said too, remember comp plans are pretty, they're not real specific. They're not supposed to be real specific. They're supposed to be general, and allow flexibility. So I just wanted to make sure going into that, that's why you do see consider and, facilitate, and those are why those words are used. It's to encourage, but not have specific mandates that you shall do that.
And I'm not suggesting shalls, but I think there's a much more direct stronger wording that if this is truly what we want to guide our specific actions, then we need to not mess around the bush and beat around the bush and just lay it out there.
Thank you. We'll look for striking the balance between long-term guiding, clear guidance, long-term clear guidance, and the flexibility, knowing that times change and information changes or new information arises. Okay, Deb, I see your hand is up.
Yes. Could you just clarify to me when you said citing, when you were talking about, did that mean like putting it in a position where it could be breaking the law, or are you talking about citing as in putting it in a specific area? I wasn't sure on that.
Yeah, so what that means is that cities are not allowed to say that essential public facilities cannot be, you can't disallow them in a certain zone. They just have to be, they have to be allowed somewhere in your city. So the suggestion here was that you think about shelters and those kinds of services as things that should be allowed in any of your zones.
Okay.
I shouldn't say any, because as residential uses, they wouldn't be in heavy industrial zones.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I just get confused. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. And the next one, these were a couple of additional comments that came in, and we can add policies for planning for and providing public bathrooms in appropriate locations, and adding an explicit policy to support urban tree canopy or street trees in more places. That was another one where we were beating around the bush. It was in a couple policies, but they were kind of hidden in the capital facilities element. So we can be more explicit about that.
Thank you. And I'd like to see language that sounds something like preserve and enhance existing tree corridors and prioritize tree planting in other areas.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. And Joshua?
This time also, I gotta say, I like these two policies. I like seeing included in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Okay, any others? Okay, now we have the big section. So we have put land use designations off to the end this meeting because in every other meeting, we had them go first, and we'd always shortchanged all the other topics. So this time I'm now going to have to ask Ian to rush and be done in about 25 minutes if you're able to get through all of them. Okay.
Yeah, sure thing. We'll see what we can do. We have come up with land use designations in the comprehensive plan. These are they cover the whole city, and they give direction in the plan about what we want to be happening in these different areas, what we want people to be doing, and what we want to be allowed to be built, and any considerations that we want to have. So that's how those are structured in the comprehensive plan. They lay out the intent, the future vision for this color that's drawn on the map, the kinds of buildings that you might be likely to see in the future, and then some considerations, some things to be aware of. This area, be aware of, think about flooding impacts. This area, think about the mix of different kinds of uses. Just some thoughts going forward. And then but these are not zones, and the city going forward will craft new zones and new regulatory language to enact the zoning that will align more or less with these land use designations. But So that's what we'll be talking about now. These are not zones. These are prototypes or some direction that will lead to zones in the future. First off, we have downtown mixed use and the commercial zone. There not a lot of changes here, but the biggest one, and going with the guidance of Sam, is to focus more on residential. The residential market is much stronger than the commercial market. And so especially that means in downtown, allowing just standalone residential, potentially apartments, but also trying to incentivize the rehabilitation of existing older buildings for residential uses. So then you get more people, more customers for businesses, more eyes on the street, more pedestrian activity, and that sort of a thing. Otherwise, not many changes here. Next one. And let me know any along the way if you can raise your hand or if you have a comment, and there's a few open questions that I'll tee up for the group. Next we have the industrial, and then also the waterfront. It looks like, I don't know if that's Sam on everyone's screen, but it looks like the waterfront part of the image is cut off. But the gray area is the industrial. The blue is the waterfront designation. Industrial, we're calling it flex industrial, would include both heavy industrial zone and light industrial zone, probably going forward, at least potentially, and would allow your typical industrial uses, also some service commercial uses, and maybe a small amount of retail. The waterfront zone would allow some light industrial uses and also some commercial uses, but it would have the important caveat that these uses ought to be oriented or connected in some way to the water, and ideally will facilitate access to the waterfront. And there's one area we had a question mark. We had it gray and then we put it to blue. This is the area just southwest of the Chehalis River Bridge. And so that's something that in this current draft of the plan that we're still working through. That's there's a foundry over there, and it and so it relates to the water to some extent, in that it's sort of traditionally served waterfront industries, but you could also consider the industrial zone. If anyone has any thoughts on that, we welcome them.
I'll also note that sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think the foundry is actually located on the north side of State Street and not in that question mark area, but it's right on the boundary of that area.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's an important clarification. Thank you.
That's the illustration that you were using for the waterfront development, right? That section.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to it for a second. So that's
I think that, well,
yeah, that's the right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so yeah, maybe we should look back at the map. We at the planning commission meeting, we scribbled on our map where we thought that an area might that could potentially support waterfront uses would be. Any other commentary on waterfront or industrial?
I didn't quite catch what, and I'm not sure if that was Joshua that just said that, but is the, was the suggestion, sorry, what was that?
No, that was just Alan.
Okay. Was the suggestion to include the full area because it was also included on that CPAT drawing in the blue, the more waterfront oriented?
Oh, no, I was just noticing that the blue-gray striped area was the kind of the same area as the waterfront development. Although in the picture that you had before the waterfront development, State Street wasn't in there, but we know what you mean, if that's, you know.
Right. Okay, and Joshua, you have your hand up.
Yes. My concern is that industrial zone looks like on West Market there. That's verging into spots that are actually residential areas.
Oh, on West Market.
Well, it's on East Market there. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, West Market. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that is for the most part, that section of the map we've used uses the existing industrial zone as the base, and I don't think we made any changes.
No,
Oh, okay.
it's the existing light industrial right now,
Right.
so
Oh,
that
okay.
didn't
Thank you.
change. You're
Thank you
welcome.
for clarifying that.
But that is relevant to some topic we'll discuss a little bit later on. Moving on. The neighborhood center mixed use designation is as really implements what Rachel and Lisa were talking about earlier on at the beginning of this meeting, these neighborhood centers and the circles that were drawn on the map that are going to have some activity, the places where people can run into each other, build some social connections, and then maybe it's just a little grocery store, or maybe a little coffee shop, or some other small business, but an idea to bring some energy into the neighborhoods, the various neighborhoods of Aberdeen. This zone would allow some apartments. It would ideally with ground floor commercial, but not necessarily, or it could just be a standalone small business. And we recommend that there be some design standards to support some predictability in the design, that it's not going to clash too much with what's existing, but not without being too hard to implement. So these areas would be spread throughout Aberdeen. We don't want to spread them too much. This is sort of, we have this limited amount of energy that we can distribute. So we tried to target them in areas that seemed like they had a lot of potential. So you'll see there's some little ones to support the B Street neighborhood, where there's already a little nucleus of activity. A larger one over in the Broadway Hill area, and another small one that could serve the Scammell Hill community and surrounding areas. There's also one in the East End and the West End. Yes, thank you. But then we have two larger ones where there's some which are a little different, and they're looking to the future where there is some potentially developable land, and these could be the centers of future neighborhoods. Or building on the what was the South Shore Mall, could be a neighborhood center, and there's some developable land near there, which is also adjacent to Grays Harbor College, and then also in the former Weyerhaeuser mill site over there. Thank you, Rachel. So again, we trying to constrain these to keep, because as Sam reminds us, there's only so much investment to go around. And so by having sort of concentrating things in a smaller area, you can build up a bit more of a chain reaction potentially, or a center that has some energy and some life to it. But we do want to make sure that we've got these right. One suggestion we had from the Planning Commission meeting was to have a small neighborhood center in the near AJ West Elementary in sort of the southwest neighborhood. So that is up for consideration. And then the other thought was Liz, in fact, suggested an expansion of the B Street neighborhood center a block over. So we're sort of still considering that as well.
And then I'll also add that some other things are up the hill in Bay Switch Boulevard. We mentioned earlier the idea of managed retreat. So if we are trying to focus any new growth or slowly work with residents on moving up the hill, this is a very long-term strategy. Nothing's happening overnight. then Bassett Boulevard does have a little tiny bit of flat land around it. Most of the area in the northwest area has a lot of critical areas, but there's some areas where there could be some housing and a different development typology than you see elsewhere. And so that is one consideration. And as we mentioned earlier, the Bench Drive neighborhood, which is unfortunately cut off this map, sorry about that, so that we could zoom into the ones we do have on the map, is another thought. And then also one thing is that in talking with the port, there are some existing industrial uses down here. So another consideration is that we may be narrowing this down, necking it down, or talking about more flexibility here. So that was a lot of things to throw at you, but we'd like to open it up for discussion. Just a quick head nod, yes or no. Are people interested in looking at this more carefully and making sure the industrial uses are clearly supported here? A yes for yes, support the industrial uses. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Alan has his hand raised.
Yes, and answer your question. One of the problems we have to think about the Bossich Road area is there's a lot of water that flows up there, and it slid once and has been rebuilt, and it's pretty uneven. You may have been up there, but I think the housing that's up there might be kind of to the edges of where it can be, because there's also main power lines, high voltage power lines coming directly out of BPA into the PUD, and I don't know if I'd want to live under one, but there a lot of that land is not very flat, and you know, but you're right. It's being a long-term thing. Maybe it's something to look at. Don't want to take anything off the table.
Thanks, Alan. Liz, your hand is up.
Deb had her hand up first.
How do you see that? Okay, so first of all, yes, I like it. I think that one of the things that I'd like to hear more about or see included in it is that we do some business support and some support for the seaport. Some of these things that we're rolling along, they're going to need help. They're going to need dollars. They're going to, you know, people need to, if we had something that could, if we saw some partnerships with the college, some partnerships with other educational foundations and places where they can learn to have successful businesses. You have a lot of little businesses that you're going to encourage to open, and to see them be successful will make other people be braver to start one and to do it right and successfully. That's just one thing I'd like to see.
And to clarify, Deb, are we talking about this proverbial sort of small neighborhood business that we'd like to see? Was that specific thing you were talking about?
Yes, and downtown as well. Downtown as well. We've got, you know, and we're talking about developing some of the stuff on the south side and some of those places, all the little neighborhood things, but to see them open and we go forward and then they're not successful, it really burns things up quickly.
That's great, thank you. And as always, we sort of craft these thinking about what we would like to happen, but part of it is just sort of opening up the possibilities and saying, you know, if you know, we wouldn't want to foreclose this wonderful thing from happening, but we can't say that there's probably not going to be not every, you know, there's not going to be the little coffee shop in every little place that's marked pink on this map.
How long did the comprehensive plan last? When you put one together, how long has it taken to get this far? And how long, when you finally adapt it, do they last? Or will it be continuously scrutinized and adjusted for things that, you know, times change or something shows as not being as effective as you'd hoped.
They're intended to last for about 20 years, but most communities do a major update every 6 or 7 years or so. And then you can do minor updates every year. Aberdeen's not under the same rules as everybody else. So you're actually allowed to update it whenever you want, do whatever you want. But Lisa, you could talk about how long the last one lasted.
2001.
Wow, that was before I came back.
Yeah.
It was truly a 20-year plan. Okay, I see 3 hands up. And I do want to note that we have less than 10 minutes to finish discussion on land use designations ideally.
I'll jump back in then. So I'm looking at the area of downtown, kind of that northwest part of downtown between West First and Market and the area of Finch Park. And I'm not sure that it's valuable to split those blocks in half as they are, with the northern part being residential high and the southern part being commercial. As long as residential high allows for mixed use sort of uses, I would say let those some of those blocks develop, at least give them the potential to develop as a block, full block scale residential mixed use sort of project. And I also really like the idea of design guidance, design guidelines that can be used for negotiating various incentives for the developer.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz.
Enjoy.
Yes, yeah, we covered the homeless situation, but there's a serious need for low-income housing. And I've worked on trying to get a tiny home village here for quite a long time, and there's still nothing there. And is that a consideration in the future, or is it something that is going to be addressed reasonably soon?
Well, absolutely. In fact, the very next slide is gets into the residential land use categories. But then, but as I've said, yeah, we have made some recommendations. We think that there should be more flexibility in the residential zones, but then it comes down to the process of making those rules, which will be another step after the plan is completed.
Okay, well, I've done a lot of research, so I've got things on how to, even a low barrier, how to make it successful, the pros and the cons. And if anybody needs any information, I've got lots of research information for all that kind of thing. So that's about what I need to say for now.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Joy. And we've heard throughout this project that housing is a major need in Aberdeen. The housing prices have been rising, and that it's gotten more difficult for locals to.
Right, because we have a lot of minimum wage jobs, college students, people like that, you know, that can pay a low fee, but they just can't pay $700 a month.
Right.
Or even 500, depending. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Monica?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the corner of the river there, the Weyerhaeuser site, and how if we're looking at keeping that open for industrial opportunities, I think the Seaport site right next to it, I think they would love to see themselves as a community center. I know I've been working with them right now to get a building that would be an event center with a commercial kitchen that they can rent out. So it's got some really good possibilities as a community center right there.
Yeah, I think she's spot on with that. And
Is that
just north of the Curtis Street label?
Yeah.
Okay? So
no, the big section. Yeah.
Yeah.
The big.
Is there a
gray
recommended
waterfront development right now by your map? I think that's.
Yeah. that was the use that we were originally looking for the seaport.
Yeah.
That allowed that flexibility to have some of their, I don't want to say industrial uses, but you know, like the lathe and the spar shop, and it allowed for that kind of a mixed development, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I want to mention that because of our interest in consolidating and focusing neighborhood centers, if we don't hear a strong ask tonight, then we probably will leave the ones that are question marks off. So like Bosage Boulevard, Bench Drive, AJ West, even more, we did expand the B Street area a little bit, the even greater expansion. We probably won't expand any further unless we hear a strong go for it tonight.
I was the one that brought up the AJ West area development, and I'm fine with you guys leaving that out of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Joshua. Okay, I'm gonna flip to the next slide.
Was that a new, Monica, did you raise your hand again? No, okay, great.
Enjoy as well.
So there are several different residential designations. They're named residential high and low are the two main ones, which is a transition from residential multifamily and residential single family. The sort of moving to the high and low is kind of to go with a bit more of a flexible zone that would allow residential high in particular would allow some small businesses, but mostly would focus on housing, medium to high density. And with some simple design standards for identity to create more human-friendly places, and to go along with Aberdeen's historic patterns. Next one, please. The residential low is the heir to the residential single family zone that we envisioning having a bit more flexibility for some types, some housing types are sometimes called missing middle housing. You may have heard that, you may have not, but it refers to a whole range of small buildings, small homes that are not quite a single family house, but still typically fit within the character of a single family neighborhood. Things like a cottage cluster or a duplex, or accessory dwelling units, which are already allowed but could have perhaps more flexibility. Just allow a lot of different options. There's no, we don't want to say there's one right housing solution for every person, many different situations. And so it's good to have many different kinds of housing and options. This could potentially allow some home occupations or very small businesses. Leave that down the road. And then finally, there's open space residential. This is our designation we've applied to the many areas in Aberdeen that were in the past designated single family residential, but they're undeveloped. And so we want to recognize that this undeveloped open land actually is an asset. If we want to leave it open, that some areas may be suitable for development, but other areas are not. And anyhow, in the meantime, we want to value these open space assets for what they provide. And if some areas are feasible for residential development, we would want to see perhaps some clustering to preserve critical areas that are nearby, and then thinking about the wildlife urban interface, so you could reduce your wildfire risk, and maybe think about trails or some other amenities, so that folks so you can really get the benefit out of these natural areas. Here's the map. We've got, again, the darker gold is the residential high. Those are mostly in the areas that was in the old multifamily zone, but it also includes what was the residential professional zone, which is something that Liz I think has asked about in our last meeting. But the idea is that those residential professional uses, say your law office or whatever, would just be allowed outright in the residential high zone. So you don't need to have those two separate zoning categories. And you can see the light green, again, is that open space residential, those areas that might be residential down the line, but they're open space for now. And then the last thing, and hopefully we have a little bit of time for discussion about, is this flex residential category. This is a zoning category that would allow homes, but would also allow some businesses, commercial uses, and some light industrial uses, with some provisions to keep these from being incompatible, and so limits on uses that would have really heavy traffic or would create air pollution or something like that. Recognizing that there'll be residences mixed in, but people have lived near employment throughout history. It's not an impossibility, and as there is need for businesses to have more land and expand, this is a tool that we think could work for that. So the area with the most flex residential is this area in between the port and Highway 101. It's an existing residential neighborhood. Yeah, and there it is again on pink on the map. There's actually is also another area over there near Cosmopolis, and then some Northland in the south as well. And so we wanted to ask you all, would this align with your vision for the future of Aberdeen? And we're talking about managed retreat and some flood or tsunami risks. Does this, would this seem like a reasonable way to start thinking about that managed retreat, and having emphasizing more residences up in the highlands and fewer residences in the lowlands? So open it up here.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Well, great. Then perhaps we don't need to dwell. Is there any more questions you wanted to ask, Rachel?
I don't think on this one.
Okay.
Uh,
And Monica also for that support.
I did have one question, actually going back to the residential. Let me go back to the big map. Because we've been talking about this idea of managed retreat, there's a handful of residential high areas. One thing, and Ian's about to talk a little bit more about the open space and just the distinctions between them, although we might go very quickly over that. But one idea is that there may be some areas outside of the utility corridor and that aren't totally encumbered by critical areas. Is there any interest in looking further into residential high up here, so that if you really are moving uphill, you're going ahead and doing it and supporting the population you may have?
I say yes.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. We'll take another stab at the map then for the next draft for somewhere up there. RH up there.
Okay.
Okay. And let me bring you back to the open space slide.
Yes, great. Yes, and so we do have we have the open space residential, which I already talked about. We also have two other open space designations. Open space parks is basically just covers your existing city parks, so that's pretty straightforward. But there's also an open space conservancy category, and that's for those other unbuilt areas, undeveloped land that are not foreseen as potential residential development, and generally they're overlap with wetlands and flood zones and things like that. And we do want to recognize the considerations in the plan would say that we want to enhance these areas and also to appreciate and perhaps enhance their benefit in reducing the risks of flooding and tsunami.
Are you saying that, so like open space residential, are you saying that the two are compatible, that development can happen in an open space residential area? And perhaps it would have more stringent requirements as to the kind of trees that are left or buffers that are required as opposed to other kinds of residential.
I think you described that very well. There's a lot of critical areas there that already encumber development. So if you were impacting a critical area, or if it's like a danger type of thing, like a steep slope, then you would have to build to mitigate those impacts. So there's already some built in the residential area. Lisa, you look like you want to add something here. But
No,
yes.
just the area south of Huntley that you have open space conservancy, that might not be.
Okay, I can't remember where Huntley is. But this is another good example of where this is the land use designation. So it's more the big overarching vision where it's recognizing that there's a lot of open space and a lot of critical areas. And then when you get into the zoning, you can talk more about if you want to go above and beyond what the critical areas ordinance is already doing in certain zones, and how stringent you want to be with the residential that could be allowed. Okay. All right. We're going to bring this home. Okay. So if you remember back to the beginning of the meeting, when you wrote down your 3 most important things that you really wanted to see in the plan, if you can go back to that and see if we covered them. Again, we didn't cover all the topics in the plan tonight at all. There's a lot more in there. But see if we covered what you really wanted to know about the plan or was really important to see in the plan. And if there's something we really missed, let us know.
I think you captured all of my 3. I would just like to see them more nuanced and developed a little farther.
Thank you, Liz, and I'm looking forward to getting all those edits.
You covered pretty much all of mine. The only thing that I had was that we take advantage of our history and pack that into a comprehensive plan. You did kind of address that. Some of the things, bringing in the Kurt Cobain thing and stuff, which is, I don't know, just utilizing the assets and the things that make us unique from other areas. And that was it. I love it. Thank you for inviting the public. It was so interesting.
You're most welcome. Thanks for being here. Anyone else want to share? Oh, sorry, Ian.
Oh, we don't have any Kurt Cobain references in the plan document.
We took some great photos at the park.
We
so
have
maybe
some
we
great
need to make
photos,
sure
so
that at least those are in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think they said that we still have 30 years to capitalize on that. So that would fall within a 20-year plan.
That's right. This is good.
Rachel, what's the time frame? So what's the drop dead date for when you need people's comments?
You are leading us right into the next step. So let me share the screen again. Lisa, do you want to go over this part or do you want me to? You're on mute.
You're muted.
That. Thank you. So I think that the hope is we would get comments in and have a draft plan for public hearing on December 8th at City Council. Receive any last minute comments, changes, whatnot. and then bring the first reading of the ordinance in at the next council meeting following December 8th. Does that answer that question? So Rachel, what else did you?
I think we can start wrapping up. Unless there's any other comments from the last part, I thought that was a good transition into these next steps and closing the meeting. I see Joy came off mute for a second.
Yeah, I'm here. Just something that is kind of my vision. It's happened here before. They did something called Paint the Corridor. There were 300 volunteers who volunteered. People offered to paint and other elements that be needed to clean up some of the buildings downtown. And my vision is to do paint the downtown corridor. And a couple of people have said I like the idea. And basically, I literally have taken my zoom lens of my camera up to the tippy top of these buildings. And literally, many of them, all they need is a few new windows and a paint job. And we will look nice and pretty. So if that's something anybody would want to consider at any given time, that's an idea I'm interested in. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
Yep.
Okay, so we're coming to a close here. I do want to note that you all are the champions of this plan. Most of you we've seen at almost every meeting that we've been in. There are a handful of new ones. I'm glad you're here, and I like the energy that was brought here at the end as well. So if you want to see the plan implemented, you're it. You all are the ones that are going to shepherd this plan. So stay involved, get on the planning commission or stay on the planning commission or council, and get on whatever listservs Lisa and her folks at the city have so that you're staying up to speed, and keep bringing your ideas to Aberdeen so that Aberdeen stays yours and is what you want it to be. Anything else from the team?
Just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I know that it's not always fun to talk about long range plans, but really appreciate the feedback and input. So thank you.